Welcome to Acolyte Aftermath, the latest after show of Comic Book Nation, where we are going to be talking about Star Wars The Acolyte every week. I'm your host, Kofi Outlaw, and joining me for our special premiere week event is comic book assistant managing editor Joe Schmidt and Patrick Cavanaugh, one of our many comic book experts who specializes in horror, Star Wars, the whole, wide range shebang-a-bang that so many of our excellent writers, interviewers, and experts here at Comic Book do so often. So, fellas, thank you for joining me. For jumping into the breach because, it's a Star Wars premiere. We never know how the internet is going to turn out these days with Star Wars content. So this is the one where we're putting ourselves out there, to possibly take a beating. But that's the fun of Star Wars these days, isn't it? So let's
you can't get into it without pissing off a few people on the internet when it comes to Star Wars. That's just the name of the game nowadays.
And the Acolyte, I'm sure, will be sparking some lively discussions. So let's get into why that's going to be and start with this kind of 2-episode premiere and just kind of get our first initial thoughts out. Patrick, why don't you start? Because you're our biggest Star Wars expert, and so I feel like we should just kind of put you out on the front lines first there. But just kidding. I always like to hear what you have to say. It helps me get my own head together when you can kind of sum up things in the larger pantheon of Star Wars.
Yeah, of course. I think one of the reasons why everybody was so, even not necessarily excited, but just intrigued by The Acolyte is that this is our first live action project taking place during the High Republic era. Like every Star Wars project over the past decade has been, okay, but how does this connect to Darth Vader? That's what everything has been. Basically, yes. And this is the first one that just fundamentally is Darth Vader is not alive. Anakin is not alive. This is so far removed from that. Everyone just wanted to know, okay, what does Star Wars look like when it is not the Skywalker saga? All these trailers, teasers, any sort of footage, it doesn't look all that different from the Star Wars as we know it. Like we see glimpses of Coruscant and we see lightsabers, we see Wookiees, we see stuff that looks familiar, but we know that this narrative isn't going to have anything to do with the Skywalker family, Palpatine, any of that stuff. So I was very curious, but not particularly. I was very much bracing myself. And speaking to the first episode specifically, I was pretty delighted. I think my first reaction when I spoke to Joe about this was how narratively similar it reminded me of Andor, because both shows start with a compelling opening scene about a murder, about an attack. You're just kind of thrust into this world, and those first 5-10 minutes really set up the tone and the vibe and the stakes of what is to follow. So you're just structurally, you are immediately engaged in why is this happening and what is the fallout going to be. So I was definitely impressed with that first opening scene. It's very Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon was a touchstone that Leslie Headland has been, talking about, and Amandla Stenberg, like they've been using that as this is the vibe of the show, and it fully made good on that promise where the character that Amandla is playing, is not doing, backflips like Obi-Wan and Darth Maul in The Phantom Menace. They're just kind of using a little bit of a force boost, if you will, to, pull off these martial arts moves and to climb rafters and things like that, seeing Carrie-Anne Moss's character. So yeah, that first opening scene really intrigued me and set me on an optimistic course for this first episode for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I gotta say, I have been not looking at trailers and things as much anymore because there's already a certain amount of exposure we all have to go through for this job when we're getting to these shows. We got to go through a lot of promotional interviews and featurettes and stuff. So I try to watch as little as I can while still doing my job. So I actually went into this not knowing like the full details of the premise of the story. I knew there was a warrior, a Jedi gets killed, there's an investigation, could be something Sithy. That was about all I got out of this. And I've been a High Republic nerd. I've been kind of, following this also. When I see like Vernestra Rowe and her purple whip lightsaber, I'm like, oh my God, I know that, and doing all that stuff. But I was very curious because, like you said, even if you've been reading the High Republic stuff, that goes back like 350 years before Skywalker Saga. Then the main thrust of it is about 200 years. And this story is 100 years. So it's operating in a space that nobody has touched.
Mm-hmm.
And it was very interesting to see where we're going. So, and we can talk full spoilers because anybody watching this is obviously should be watching the show before you come here. So when we got to the whole split about Osha and May, like I really didn't even know any of that. So I was instantly kind of intrigued through the first episode of like, were these two people, was this like a werewolf thing? Like, could this be one of those things? And the way they played it kind of kept you guessing. And it was one hell of a first opening episode because we talk about first episodes, first comic issues, things like that. And Leslie Headland really and company packed so much into this, where you got so many brushstrokes of like this history. We need a Star Wars trauma. Like there was a trauma that kind of could set people down light and dark paths. You don't really know, all these characters who are supposed to be like, even the Jedi, like Saul, you don't know the full kind of complexity of their characters and emotions and where they're at. And you get a bunch of entertainment in this one from, like you said, a great fight scene with Indara and May to, a starship escape that's, kind of hilarious and informative at the same time about who Osha is and why she's different and kind of compelling and all that. And then you get some of the kind of darker, scary stuff with like, phantomy, weird magic stuff and stuff like that. So I was really intrigued. One thing I just came away knowing was like, I feel confident that Leslie Headland is, like the first time I saw The Mandalorian, right? Like this person knows Star Wars and understands kind of the fundamental mechanics of Star Wars independent of individual characters like the Skywalkers, because that opening scene fight and how she gets to Indara is just like, that's deep Star Wars lore knowledge about like who a Jedi is, what a Jedi does, and kind of how to play that. And I think I could say about these first two episodes, I like seeing the logic that's behind something like when there's a duel, when there's an attack, or somebody's trying to kill somebody, there's actual like storytelling, planning, like there's substance to it. It's not just, magic weapons flying around and doing things. Although I did laugh every time because it was in the trailer we were watching as we're talking here. The reaching for weapons motif, like when they're fighting all the time. I was like, that is pure Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. That movie was built on people missing grabs very slowly, but I still love it. But I was very impressed by the kind of, I don't want to use the word because that gets such a flame war in Star Wars fandom, but like the feeling of authenticity in this.
Definitely.
That this was somebody who really, like I said, understands that magic of Star Wars and where to kind of pull from for that.
I'm very impressed that you avoided the spoiler aspect of it, because I was telling Patrick before is that I saw a fan theory about people analyzing the trailers very, specifically where they noticed that Amandla Stenberg's character has two different hairstyles. And so there would be twins. She'd be playing two different characters. And so I saw that fan theory and didn't really pay it any attention because, like trailers can show growth over time. We didn't really know much. And then I was very pleasantly surprised, not spoiled, and it didn't ruin it for me, but it kind of enhanced my enjoyment. Like, oh, damn, the Star Wars fans still got it. They can still get down to the minutia and figure it out. And I really, really enjoyed that twist aspect of it, because I think the cool thing, like we're talking about Leslie Headland and how much she gets Star Wars and how this is set in a different period of time. I think the coolest thing about it is that we see the duality of the Force. And there's always been these, like a lot of just pontificating on what the Force is and the balance of the Force, and how when one side is overwhelming, there always is some event that creates a series of events that creates balance, that causes, the scales to be tipped maybe in favor of another. And so we're seeing basically that the Jedi are at the height of their game. They're dominating everything that's going on in the galaxy. And this is the big inciting incident of probably what we will know of as the Sith. And we know that being whether it's, getting back to the old Republic style, if there's a bunch of Sith, and then there's the rule of two. The rule of two, where there's, a master and apprentice always. And right now we kind of have a master and we have an apprentice, based on what we've seen with May and her character and her mysterious master, who, we just see lurking on the rocks in the ocean, and we don't know who he is or who she is, who they are. But I think the coolest thing about this is that Leslie Headland gets that duality of the Force. And it's almost the same thing that happened with the creation of Anakin and the creation of Luke and Leia, but in like a more fundamental way of light side and dark side, where there are two twins that are on two distinct different paths. And I think that this is I was telling my wife, my fan theory before all this, when we were watching, I was like, oh man, I think that this is going to be basically the Force balancing itself, where light side has been in control for so long. And that doesn't mean that the people who are in control of the light side are correct in every single aspect of it. And sometimes you need a little bit of darkness to balance that out. And that's what we're kind of seeing with the twins going on their two different paths. Because I think, we've talked about Carrie-Anne Moss's character, and really, I think we all kind of mentioned how the Jedi in this moment kind of feel like sheriffs in small towns that, are kind of running their own little fiefdom. And that's the vibe that I got from it. I don't know. I might be reading it into it a little bit differently, but the Jedi don't seem as altruistic as they kind of are portrayed in the prequel trilogy, if you guys get what I mean. I might be reading too deep into that. What do you guys think?
We're going to split. I know we're splitting the show up to kind of do just these recaps, and then we're going to have a special guest from the Acolyte cast who we're going to hear from in some of our interviews, and then we're going to get geeky at the end. But there is a whole part of it. No, you're not wrong. That was a fair question. I'm just saying that I have a whole dissertation, because Vernestra's character is a very interesting one to include, because when this when her story begins, she's in the YA novels, and she's a pluck character. Is plucky. She's a Jedi prodigy. She makes this whip, and she's helping the High Republic Jedi as this young, optimistic girl who is clearly not this person we meet in this later part in this thing. She's clearly grown up and been through some stuff. So it's kind of there is a question hanging over this, like all Star Wars, about it being a bridge, about what happened during this ongoing saga where we're seeing where in the High Republic, the Jedi are fighting this entire pirate raider group called the Nihil, who just have really beaten their heads in, kind of taken over a section of space. And they're at war when we find them now. We're in some serious times with them. Major Jedi characters have been taken off the board. The Nihil have these kind of force-eating monsters. So the Jedi are in a battle when we are here. So 100 years later, like you said, clearly they're dominating. It's not a spoiler that they won and they kind of finished out the High Republic before we got to the High, because the Skywalker saga is still, the Order is strong. They're with the Republic. They just don't know that they're headed for a fall. So that question is still hanging over this show about kind of where we have been in the history of the Jedi and the High Republic, and what got us to here and to this kind of time where have been controlling space cops, because Outer Rim is a frontier in 100 years before this. That's what the story's all about. And them going in the Outer Rim and being we're bringing our thing to the Outer Rim, and everybody being yo, there's been a lot of people out here who moved out here because they wanted to practice or live their way and stuff. And now you guys are kind of colonizers coming out here, and there's more out here in the dark side, malevolent groups. And, we don't want the Republic, and we don't want the Jedi, and they're going to fight back against that. So I'm really interested to see how this series deals with all that. And like you said, this tipping point where finally it seems like it's been too long, too much, and something's pushing back.
And we get hints of it. We do get hints of it with May and Osha's division and how Osha blames May for the death of her family, and we still don't know what happened. And you really kind of get the sense that we don't know the full story.
Yeah. And there's like and that's what I mean. Well, they did a good job of mystery kind of sewing that all in very quickly within this first episode. And definitely what my proving point was the second episode, because that's where things can slow down. And even Andor arguably kind of had that second episode that was a little bit slower before we got to the third episode where things really kind of kicked into gear. So I was actually pleasantly surprised about how well the momentum and the kind of character deepening went from episode 1 through episode 2.
Well,
sorry, that was
so
it.
To your point, just kind of, to Joe's point about that the Jedi aren't these neutral party protector diplomatic type of characters. One of my favorite elements of even just that opening fight scene or lines that really pique my interest is that Carrie-Anne Moss it's Indara, her character says, "We have an unregistered Force user," which was really evocative, thinking like that this is a point in time in the galaxy where if you have any sort of sensitivity to the Force, you need to be registered with someone, which immediately, that was the central conflict of not only so many real world horrifying situations throughout world history, but even just at like, Captain America Civil War. Like that was the whole impetus of what made that movie, what made that comic storyline so fascinating is like, no, it's okay if you have these abilities, you just need to register them with someone. And so realizing like, even though it isn't totally fleshed out in these first 2 episodes, just planting that seed of if you have any sort of attunement to the Force, you need to register with someone is a really fascinating idea. And so obviously further into the season, we're probably going to be touching on that a bit more. But yeah, that's just with that one throwaway line, I feel like it fully set up. No, this is not a Jedi Order that's like benevolent peacekeepers. It's kind of you need to tell us that you have this ability if you want to not have us alert other Jedi who are out there and put you on our radar that we're going to be keeping a watch over you.
And we've seen this before too. We've seen this with the Inquisitors. We've seen this post Order 66 when the Inquisitors are hunting down anyone that has any Force abilities, Jedi or not. So it's not just there are some cool echoes that Leslie Headland just gets that, she understands the Star Wars universe, obviously to a certain degree where pushing it. And it's not just like the fantasy aspect of, the hero's journey with Luke going on this quest and ultimately, vanquishing evil. It's just going into the cool things that George Lucas established of just like the complexities of the universe. And that's what I think is really cool. Like we've seen how the show kind of like the premise of it is pretty laid out where May is going out and killing Jedi. Osha thinks that, she is orphaned and left behind and thought she found her place in the galaxy and clearly did not when she left the Jedi Order and has gone and become, the ship repair person. And basically because her identical twin is going out and has successfully murdered a Jedi, she gets brought in by the Jedi Order and they think that she did it. And they cast doubt on her, because they say like, oh, it obviously is you. This looks like you. And she has to prove her innocence. And in doing so, she has to find out that she wasn't orphaned, that her sister is alive. And that causes all these new emotions and confusions that Jedi obviously are not supposed to have. And that's reflected also in her former Jedi Master Sol, who is one of my new favorite characters in the Star Wars universe. I mean, like, I do love May, I do love Osha, but Sol really kind of set the tone for like the Jedi that you know shouldn't be, because they're supposed to be so pragmatic and stoic and not connected to their emotions. And then Soul comes in and you can tell he has feelings and connections to all of these people. And it's like, that's going to bite you in the ass, Soul. But I still like, that's what makes him such a compelling character. You know what I mean?
Yeah, Lee Jung-jae is, I mean, if you don't know, who was the protagonist of Squid Game as well, he's just killing it. I mean, he learned English for this, and his delivery of it is just, it's like pitch perfect for a Jedi character, and just like his measured speech and everything, and his whole vibe. And like you said, the level of depth that he has, and the little kind of idiosyncratic things that he has going on behind the stoicism. I was kind of pleasantly surprised, and we can get kind of deeper into this a little bit. Or should we talk to Amandla Stenberg first and do that? And then, yeah, let's do that. We're going to hear from Amandla Stenberg about getting into character as May and Osha in this whole story of Star Wars The Acolyte. And keep your ears open, because you may want to very much listen to some of the things she could be teasing here.
The end of the High Republic really is like this political upheaval kind of change in the Star Wars universe, and it's, time of peace, not so peaceful after that. Mm-hmm. And your character sort of also has that sort of pivotal experience, I think, throughout this show. And I've only seen the beginning, but I'd love to hear about how you think May's journey kind of reflects what's going on in the universe as a whole.
It's a great question, and one that I feel like people who love Star Wars watching the show are going to debate a lot. I think we live in a time in which there's a lot of conceptions around the Force, different communities that utilize the Force. And like in our point in the timeline, the Jedi are kind of the ones dictating how the Force is utilized. And so I think it's so fascinating for there to be this introduction of this character who utilizes it in a different way and comes from a different community, almost a different spiritual community. And because of that, she's more of a danger to them, because her way of utilizing it differs from what they're used to.
So being Force sensitive means, like on set, you get to use the Force. So if you go like that, people are flying away. If you want to pull something to you, it's going to come to you. Talk to me about, like, is that like an addicting sort of experience? Like, is that kind of like a drug? Like, talk to me about using the Force on
using
set.
The Force?
Yes, come on. That's gotta be the coolest thing ever.
It is the coolest thing ever, and there's so many things to think about when you think about, Force wielding, because we almost get a lot of creative freedom, particularly with this character, around what that looks like for her, because she's not a Jedi and she's not strictly a Sith. So I thought a lot about my hand positioning. I talked about it a lot with my master Lou, who taught me all my stunt choreography. And for me, I thought it would be more interesting, like, I mean, there is this, like, this movement is utilized often, and it's the way you're, like, maintaining chi and balance. But I thought for May, like, having it be a little crooked, like a little more twisted would make more sense for her.
Thank you to Amandla Stenberg for coming on and sharing some more depth about Star Wars The Acolyte. And be sure to stay tuned to our show every week, because we will be talking with more of the cast and crew of the show. All right, guys, for our second half, let's get geeky and talk about, some Star Wars. Let's talk about some High Republic and really get into it. So I want to say you guys were I was just trying to sit here and be like, don't nerd out during the first half when you guys were talking about, the concept of Force use at this time. And Patrick pointed out how they have, like, registered Force users, and, the Jedi are talking and things like, unregistered Force users, which implies a whole system of registration, which is a big deal, because in the furthest back stories of the High Republic, the Jedi were part of this group called the Convocation of the Force, which was a collection of like a dozen different Force religions. Some of them splintered off and became the Path of the Open Hand, which then became the Nihil Pirate Raiders. But there were these spiritual groups that they very much ended up getting into conflict and skirmishes with, because some of them believed you could only use the Force in this instance. Some of them believed that no mortal should even be messing with the Force, that they should just be kind of beholden to it and not trying to use it in any sense. And yeah, this was a big deal. So the Jedi of the High Republic era were in a group of Force-using religions that all shared and counseled and kind of helped balance each other out and stave off conflicts until it fell apart, obviously. So to get to this point, you know, we're talking what? Yeah, about like 250 years later, roughly. And now the Jedi have a kind of controlling hold on everybody using the Force. I mean, that says, again, a lot of ripples of like what has happened to change the galaxy that much in that time. So,
you know, we haven't even heard anything about a council. We haven't heard anything about any sort of governing body right now. I mean, in the show, like all we have to go off of is that basically the Jedi Order is the rule of law and across the entire galaxy, and not just the enforcement, but it feels like they're the government, you know, of the fact that they are registering people and sending Jedi throughout different disparate regions to police them. Like that seems like that there is no republic. There is no empire. There's no ruling body except for these space wizards that have magic powers and swords that can cut you in half very, very easily. You know, like it's kind of intimidating if you think about it.
That was a detail I really liked about the show, was how they kind of, instead of the lightsaber swords, which we don't see that many considering what time period we're in and how many people are carrying them, that they do a lot of work to make the Jedi's force powers seem slightly sinister. Like early on in that first episode, when Charlie Barnett's character, Yord comes in, and even Saul, like when they're just like done with the BS, they just put up a hand and they're like messing with people's minds. And it's just like, there's a brazenness to it where people are like, okay, all right. Like the Trade Federation people and all that, like that, it's crazy. And, you know, it makes them seem, like you said, that they are cops that are willing to just, you know, not violate freedoms, but they have these kind of powers of law in step with like the Republic that we know from later things becomes like part of the whole debate. Cause that was Ahsoka and a bunch of other people's whole thing in the Clone Wars. It's like Jedi weren't supposed to be cops serving a government. We serve, you know, life and the Force and all that. So it is crazy to see just like how used to they are, because Yord really is that young rookie cop kind of guy.
Like that Charlie Barnett scene was pretty sinister, all things considered. I was very uncomfortable by that like threat of using a mind trick just to get the information out and just being so like kind of snide about it. That's like getting pulled over by a cop and like, you know, them toying with you if they're going to give you.
Yeah, you instantly know. You know, as soon as the conversation starts, you're like, this is that.
You
guy.
were a bully in high school. I can tell.
You're that guy from school.
You're that
Here
guy.
we go. Yeah.
But also like Carrie-Anne Moss's character in the beginning, while she does seem pretty intimidating while she's there, she does do the right thing and it ends up killing her. So I know we're like giving the Jedi shit for all this, you know, we're saying like, oh yeah, they might be the bad guys, but really truly to be a Jedi, you are there to serve the people who are weaker than you. And we see that it ends up being her downfall. So that is cool. Like we're not losing sight of it, but there is just this moral complexity to who they are and why they do what they do. And, you know, like some of them seem worse than others. And I think that's just a cool reflection of real life that as Star Wars continues to go on, it can't just remain the fairy tale. It can't just remain the original trilogy that we saw that was very black and white. Because even George Lucas knew it wasn't that. When he goes back and does the prequels, he showed you it wasn't black and white. Yes, there are bad guys. Yes, there are good guys. But the dogmatic dedication to their creed is what served as the downfall to the Jedi, which allowed the Sith to rise. And so this is just an extension of that and another exploration. And I really enjoyed it. I really, really enjoyed these first two episodes and how they showed, yes, there's good guys. There are bad guys. May is obviously doing some awful things, but it hints that May has a reason to do it and why she thinks that she's right in her mind. And I can't wait to find out why.
Yeah, compelling villains who's not really like did a good job of making you understand the other side of perspective, which, you know, obviously can be kind of murky in Star Wars at times if not done right.
Especially in the case of like Anakin, you know, like Anakin was very selfish. He was very much like, I need my wife to be alive and I This is my order for my galaxy. I mean, Patrick and I have talked about kind of the complexity. Like before, when we watched the episode, we were both just like, this is a different way of Star Wars. And I think he put it best when he said it was like Andor, but with like in the High Republic with the Force instead of just moral complexities of people who have to exist under Imperial ruling.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
let's get into.
I'm really curious about is I personally preferred the first episode to the second episode because some of the things that you are talking about that is helping like Charlie Barnett's character establishing that tone of someone who's maybe got a chip on their shoulder, a little too big for their britches. Is that some of, and Jamie Lovett talked about this in his review of the first 4 episodes of the series, that the structure, the story is leaning a little bit too into sort of just like one-dimensional archetypes. And I'm really hoping that is just being used as like a storytelling shorthand to just kind of get viewers speed on, okay, this is just going to be the quick way to establish who these people are and what these relationships are between Daphne Keene's character and Manny Jacinto's character. Like, just kind of painting in broad strokes, because at this point, I feel like May, Osha, and Master Soul are the most compelling and nuanced characters at this point. So I'm hoping that the further into the series that we get to see more of this gray area, nuanced, subtle layers of these characters, and you know, really start to unpack all of the complexities of everybody's dynamic in the High Republic.
I feel like there's a safe bet that a lot of this setup that we're initially seeing is meant to kind of mask later turns or reveals. Like I have theories. Oh, I have theories. Like I'm wondering even at this.
When do you not have theories, Kofi?
I mean, it's what they pay me for, man. Like I gotta have theories all the time. Like, yeah, Manny. I'm wondering if Manny's character is, you know, this goofy kind of guy that we've seen. If he isn't the master, the way he just kind of has theories about, like, while he's making poison, I was like, that's a whole lot of kind of.
I said the same thing. It's like it's Kaiser Sose. It is the same thing as like he's just feeding you this information and feeling hapless, and he's probably pulling the strings. I'm with you, man. I think that you know. I think Manny Jacinto, Jason from The Good Place, pretending to be Ezra Miller, is pretending to be a hapless Kaiser Sose type character who is actually the master. That is my Charlie from Always Sunny in Philadelphia conspiracy board theory. You know, like that is, I'm connecting the dots there. I'm with you. I agree.
Yeah, I mean, that'd be very interesting to kind of see him kind of play against type like that. I think Charlie Barnett's character will have some kind of drastic thing. I wonder if he'll make it out of this whole thing alive, but I think he'll have some kind of turn where he does, you know, stops acting like rookie cop and actually does some kind of awesome sacrificial thing. I really like Daphne Keene's character, and I hope like we get to see something dynamic from her, because her whole thing is just, as Jackie Lawn is just, in her whole interplay with the rest of the Jedi is hilarious. And yeah, but well, I'm keeping my eye on.
She seems like the level, like Daphne Keene's character seems like the level-headed person who her eyes are going to be opened by what is going on. Like I said, like we don't know what happened with May and O'Shea when, you know, on that planet. And we don't know why May is on a murder spree to go get revenge on these particular Jedi. And I have a feeling that even when we find out, we're still not going to know the truth. And so there's some complexity again to the Jedi and what they think they're doing. Like she convinced the guy to kill himself for a reason. May convinced that Jedi who was meditating basically ever since that crime to kill himself. So the fact that she was able to do that means that, and we see the Wookiee Jedi, I forget his name, which is a really awesome name. So someone please remind me, because that is a great Wookiee Jedi name.
Call Naka.
Yes.
Kel Naka. Yeah.
Great Star Wars name. But the fact that like he's living in exile on this planet in a broken down ship, like obviously something happened. But like, obvious Soul is still living as a Jedi, and Indara was still living as a Jedi. But these two obviously went through something that made them make the choices that they made. And so I feel like we're going to find something out that maybe paints some moral complexities. And I feel like Daphne Keene's character is going to be kind of like, not because obviously the twins are going to be affected by it because they both thought each other was dead. They both thought the other was dead. And now they're learning that they're both alive. So they have some growth to go through themselves. But I feel like Daphne Keene's character is like that moral center. She has grown in the Jedi and she has been training under Soul for so long that when she gets to this point, that she is going to realize that there is maybe something different about what has actually taken place. And that's going to kind of change her guidance on this journey.
Yeah, I have theories about that because there's some clues on, like I said, from if you've been reading the High Republic stuff, there are some clues. Hoover Nestra is now where that story is with like the amount of force-based threats that came out during that earlier period, you know, the registration, all of this stuff. Like, I'm kind of wondering if there's this kind of allusion made to throughout these episodes that May did something to their home. And I'm kind of wondering if that's not complicated with the Jedi, if there wasn't something there, or if the Jedi didn't have some kind of secret mandate or something that makes them control force use in a way that's a lot darker than, you know, we might think, like eliminating threats before they start to spring up, that whole Civil War. Or no, that was a Winter Soldier thing, you know, identifying threats and getting rid of them before they pop up. I see could be an interesting twist in this story, because we do know that like by the time the Skywalker saga comes around, like there isn't that much out there, right? Like it's that we know of. It's the Jedi and the Sith in secret, and in secret with good reason.
Which goes to that balance thing. You know, it goes to the balance and how like the duality of the Force also ties into the Sith, and how the Sith, they realize that the way that they come up is through secrecy, biding their time, master and apprentice, always two, only two. There's always someone who's in control, training the next person to take over. And that goes all the way up and down the line until we get to Plagueis and Palpatine. And Palpatine is the one that is the catalyst for the Sith taking control. I think this is just the birth of that seed of balance coming to the Force. And we're going to see why, because it doesn't seem insidious. Like, even we don't know what May's intentions are. May obviously has an axe to grind against the Jedi. She thinks that they killed her sister and they killed her family. O'Shea blames her sister for killing her family, and she believes the Jedi are in the right. But there is something here that is going on that is going to show us that the Force is a little bit more ambiguous in not just good or bad, but light and dark. You know, light and dark, it doesn't mean one is good or inherently, and one is inherently bad. We're going to see, I think, and that's what is a very interesting topic that Leslie Headland is exploring. But again, as we said at the beginning of this episode, it might not be something that most Star Wars fans are excited to see, you know, because it's very
Last Jedi was right. Last Jedi was right.
Again, everyone who's listening, you are with the Last Jedi crew. Like, we are all Last Jedi defenders. I don't think anyone can really defend what happened in The Force Awakens, or not The Force Awakens, but Rise of Skywalker. It was a movie. It ended a trilogy. That's fine. But all three of us here are pretty much Last Jedi defenders. So if you want to yell at us on the internet, please go and do, and we will be happy to tell you why you are wrong. No, I'm just kidding. Everyone has their own opinions about things, but Last Jedi, cannot deny, the three of us at least, great movie.
Let's open the door. Force has never been the same. Now we're exploring so many other people. Yeah. Go ahead, Patrick.
Another thing that I want to bring. Oh yeah, no, just something I want to bring up is it reminded me when Joe mentioned May having an axe to grind. That just speaking to seemingly throwaway lines of dialogue is when May expresses to Manny's character, how her master has tasked her. She has to kill she has to kill 4 Jedi, and 1 Jedi has to be killed weapons. And when it comes to seeing that transition to becoming a Sith master or a Sith Lord in the prequels with Anakin, it was seemingly arbitrary. It was Palpatine just saying, you're going to be Darth Vader now because you are clearly that tied in to killing Mace Windu to some degree. But it's just really interesting seeing this challenge that is being bestowed upon her of here are whatever she's going to become after killing these 4 Jedi. So that's something that is not only does it narratively give this ticking clock of she's already killed by episode 2, she's already killed 2 of the Jedi. She has to kill 2 more, and we know who those other 2 are going to be. Why does it have to be without weapons? Like, who is going to be next on her list? And that's where I think the Kill Bill influence comes into it, because Kill Bill was another touchstone that the casting crew have kind of used to reference what really has my interest piqued of why she needs to kill a Jedi without using weapons.
And then we get into the end of the first episode where the master basically kind of lays it out of what an acolyte is and how you kill the Jedi and kill belief in the Jedi and how you do that. And I thought that was a very intriguing point. And it really kind of serves, it's really funny because this is a prequel to the prequels. And this is something that we never thought we would need in Star Wars. But it really plants that seed of how do you kill belief in the Jedi? And that's what what the master, the evil master, he's not calling him a Sith yet, but that's probably going to lead to that point. But that's what it's establishing. And I just it's super intriguing. Leslie Headland has a clear idea of what she wants to do with this story. And it's not something that we've seen in other Star Wars stories of kind of a villain-centric origin type thing. I know we're probably going to get something similar to that with whatever James Mangold has cooking with his prequel film that he has coming out. But even then, I enjoy that this era of Star Wars, and it might not be for everyone, but I enjoy the era that kind of pushes the foundations of what we know, what has been established, into intriguing new directions. I grew up on this franchise. I've pretty much loved every single little bit of it. And so to see it kind of change in this way is very much for me as a fan. I don't need to see the same thing over and over again. I would much rather see complex ideas being explored in this galaxy, in this universe, because as we get older, we all have different changing viewpoints and ideas. We're all evolving. And so I would like to see the Star Wars franchise just change just like this.
Okay, we got to get out of here in a minute, but just a little bit of nerdy Easter egging for everybody out there. The planet that Osha crashes on, Karlak, actually is because I've been checking, you got to check all the names of everything in Star Wars, has a long history in Star Wars. It was in the High Republic earlier. It is a place where the Jedi launched a counterstrike against the Nihil to capture them after the Nihil caused a big massacre. And so they fought a decisive battle there. It was also in Clone Wars when Ahsoka Tano was there and took on Death Watch, the Mandalorian group, Death Watch, who kind of wreaked some havoc on that planet. So yeah, this is a planet that's in between, has history on both sides of this story. So it was kind of funny.
Just like an eternal war zone there, it seems like.
Yeah, that planet is a lot of serious stuff goes down on that planet. So
seen some stuff.
Shout out to that. Yeah. Otherwise, we can get out of here. I think we will be excited. I think we're all excited. I think we're all into the series right now. I'm kind of really excited to see where they go from here. There's 8 episodes. Yeah,
I believe so. Yeah.
So yeah, these first two, and I don't even think you needed the first two. I was surprised they released them. I think you could have done just the first one and would have had me in. But I mean, the first two do give you a kind of a very good, like you said, picture between what's going on with the sisters, you know, the complexity of this hunt for the Jedi, the Master, and like whatever's going on with that. And so I'm very interested to see where this is going next, because I enjoy this as a Star Wars movie fan and also as a High Republic fan. It was good to see this era kind of in live action finally.
I'm just excited to see a yellow lightsaber. You know, we saw one with Rey, but I want to see like a duel with a yellow lightsaber. If real ones know, Star Wars Jedi Outcast 2, when you could make your own character and you could customize your lightsaber, yellow lightsaber was my go-to. You know, most people go like purple or green. Yellow was my favorite. So to see these in live action and duels, I'm very excited to see that.
Patrick, you have any final thoughts before we get out of here?
Yeah, even though I kind of started off by saying like this is the first thing that's not connected to the Skywalker saga and how that excited me. I think more than any of the characters specifically, what excites me about this series is that this is going to allow the program to just set up mythologically the downfall of the Jedi and how it is the ego that is ultimately going to, even if we don't see the stories explicitly connecting the dots between the High Republic and the prequel movies, how this just plants that seed. And I think that's some of what my favorite expand on that Skywalker saga. These ancillary tales encourage you to recontextualize the stories that you already know. So even though I don't need to explicitly see how we go from the High Republic to the prequels at the end of these 8 episodes.
All right, that'll do it for our premiere episode of Acolyte Aftermath. We are Comic Book Nation, the only show that does it all for geek culture, and you can find all of our programming over on the Comic Book Nation feeds. We do a show for anime, we do a show for gaming, we have a live show every week, a comic show every Wednesday and Tuesdays now. We have Acolyte Aftermath. Thank you, Patrick. Thank you, Joe. I will see rest of you Star Wars fans out there on the battlegrounds of Twitter and such, where we can trade our thoughts about the Acolyte. Thank you guys for tuning in. Come back next week. Thank you for Amandla Stenberg for tuning in for jumping on and talking about the show.
She might be watching. We don't know. You know, she might be.
Thank you.
Good show.
And may the force be with everybody. Let's get out there.